Good afternoon, everybody. Ooh, that's loud. Welcome to the Center for Civic Engagement's Office Hours series. We are back with another edition. My name's Dave Dulio, professor in the Political Science Department and director of the Center for Civic Engagement. If you are new to Office Hours, we're glad you're here. Welcome to those who are in here in person and those joining us on Zoom across the country. And I know that because we have people in at least 2 or 3 different states. You know who you are. If you are a repeat customer for Office Hours, welcome back. We're glad to have you. Special occasion today because we have a guest moderator. If you have been to Office Hours before, you know that I'm usually in that chair, but we are delighted to have Chris Reed from the Oakland Center. He's our host today here in the Winter Garden, where we can look out in nice sunshine and see the Elliott Tower. It's a great spot to get some lunch or get a cup of coffee. So if you're on campus, stop by. And I'm joined by my colleague, Nicole Matthew from the Political Science Department. And the topic today is presidential primaries. So everybody knows how it works, who's a repeat customer. But if you're new, it's all question-based. Chris is going to ask us some questions. We've got the Zoom, I believe it's chat or Q&A that's open. Q&A function is open in the Zoom window. Ask us whatever you like. And it'll be fun to see what comes in via the Zoom questions. But Chris, we'll turn it over to you. And thanks for having us. Thanks for being our moderator.
Well, thank you, Dave, for inviting me to do this. I know it was a little last minute, but I really appreciate it. Always excited to have you here. So obviously discussing the primary here in Michigan next week. So let's start with the first one. We have a presidential primary next week. I know early voting in person has started, but first and foremost, will the results matter?
So they will matter, but not in maybe the sense that they normally do. I think that there's something interesting going on with the delegates this year because the Democrats moved up the primary date past when the Republican Party wanted it. And so we're only awarding, I think, 16 delegates from the voting on Tuesday, and the rest are going to be chosen at a convention the following week. So there aren't that many delegates at stake, but because this is the really only primary where no one has a home state between what happened a few weeks ago in Nevada and Super Tuesday the following Tuesday, I think people will be looking at the results to see how much support there is for Nikki Haley and if Super Tuesday is even going to matter. And I think the other thing people will be looking at is how much support there is for Biden, because there's a bit of a movement to vote uncommitted in the Democratic primary, especially among Arab Americans, in protest to Biden's strong support for Israel. So we'll see how much support Biden has in the primary on Tuesday.
Yeah, Nicole, let's circle back to something you said, because I think it's always important for us to remember what we're doing in these presidential primaries, right? We are, you mentioned delegates. That is the principal purpose of these contests, right? To basically instruct the folks that are going to go from Michigan to each of the party's national conventions over the summer, and at that point formally choose the party nominee, right? So we're going to send delegates from Michigan to the Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention, and they're supposed to reflect the results of the primaries here, right? So the candidates are competing for delegates that will show up at those conventions. And I think the point that is another point that is important is on the GOP side. You mentioned it, right? They're going to do 2 different types of contests. One, a primary that is, as you mentioned, before the window that the RNC allows them to go, which is really through no fault of their own. That's when the state scheduled the primary, so they kind of got hosed by the Democrats in Lansing. But they're also going to do this convention type structure on March 2nd, I believe, which can, and maybe we'll get into this later, but the warring factions of the Michigan Republican Party right now are, it appears, going to schedule even competing conventions. The state of the, well, we'll save that for later, but the state of the Republican Party in Michigan is
Absolute chaos.
chaos is a good word. Yeah.
Well, why don't we stick with that for a second then? So the Republican Party seems to be in a state of disarray. How could that impact both the primary and the 2024 election itself?
So no one really knows what's going to happen at this convention, including the two dueling chairs of the Michigan Republican Party. So we have one chair that has been there for a while and doesn't really seem to have the support of the National Republican Party, no longer has the support of Donald Trump. And then we have another chair that has the support of the RNC, but doesn't have the passwords to the bank accounts or the website. So it's a pretty big problem. And I'm not even sure how he's going to rent space for his convention. So we don't know which convention the precinct delegates are going to go to. So that's just a big wild card, what's happening there. But I think it's spells bad news for the Republican Party of Michigan for November, because we have an open Senate seat. We're a swing state for the presidential election. We have a couple House districts that are open. And a Republican Party in disarray is not really going to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. So it's kind of interesting to see what's going to happen and if they can get their act together before November.
So the one chair that you mentioned, that's been there for a while, just about a year since she was elected, that's Christina Caramo. And if you ask the other individual, Pete Hoekstra, former member of Congress, former ambassador to the Netherlands, he would say that, and I think the RNC would say too, that there's only one Republican Party chair and that it's Pete Hoekstra. Christina Caramo continues to say that she is the duly elected chair of the party, and more and more people are taking issue with that, including the former president, right? And I would say that two things about that. I mean, think about this, right? Where Donald Trump has said Pete Hoekstra is the chair, and there are Republicans that are still hanging on to Christina Caramo as party chair. How far has the Republican Party gone to where even Donald Trump's endorsement and acknowledgement is not enough to bring those folks back to, or to for them to say, yeah, we're with Pete, right? I mean, it's really quite something to watch.
And in the meantime, no one who wants to donate money to the Republican Party knows where to donate it to or who's in control of it. And the state parties pretty much exist just for the purpose of fundraising. So they're not fulfilling their main function that they're supposed to be doing right now.
And that's right. That's been one of the things that has made Christina Caramo's time as chair. I won't say it's a failure, but I mean, that's her inability to raise money was one of the things that pushed people toward not supporting her anymore. Right. And I'll disagree on one piece of this about the impact in November. I don't think it means much at all. The fact that the party is in disarray, only because we do have these hot races and they're high leverage situations, right? Where the outcome of the two U.S. House seats, the U.S. Senate seat, and certainly the electoral college vote here could mean the difference in who wins and who loses, right? So the fundraising piece, yes, they won't be able to spend much money, but look, all of those races are going to have the resources that they require, right? There's third party money is going to come in from everywhere on these for all of these seats. And, we're going to see hundreds of millions of dollars spent just in Michigan on probably those four races, right? I mean, even you'll have the U.S. Senate race will be $100 million race, probably before August. So, I mean, get ready, folks. Ads are coming.
Yeah, but the candidates are going to be on their own to coordinate, turn out the vote, and third parties can come in, but they can't coordinate with campaigns either. So it's going to be a totally uncoordinated effort to turn out the Republican vote in November.
I think and I think that if there's an impact, that's it. It's field work, GOTV work, that candidates up and down the ballot have counted on the party apparatus for years and years and years.
Great. So let's jump back to the top of the ballot. 2024, it's looking like it's going to be a repeat of 2020 with former President Trump, President Biden. Is there any reason to believe that it's going to be different this time around?
Not right now. I mean, we're going to get the matchup that 60-70% of Americans do not want. I mean, it's quite stunning that, you know, you can't get 70% of Americans to agree on most things, but they agree that they don't want these two candidates that are going to represent the two major parties, and that's what we're going to give them. It would take something pretty crazy to happen for us not to see that matchup, right?
I don't think it's likely that one of the candidates will drop out, but I think it's more likely than people are currently saying, just because now is the least optimal time to drop out. Because if, say, Biden were to drop out of the race, no one else can get on any of the primary ballots going on. Most of the deadlines have passed. So you're looking at handing the nomination to a Dean Phillips, right? Who no one knows. So I think if Biden were to drop out, he would definitely wait until the primary season is over. Anytime between June and August, when the convention is, could drop out, his delegates become uncommitted, and he could even have some say in urging them behind a particular candidate. So the fact that he hasn't dropped out at this point, I don't think is a very good evidence that he's not going to drop out, because it would be dumb to drop out right now.
So let's have some fun with that. Who would be a likely likely individual for him to throw his support behind if he were to drop out?
Well, the most obvious would be Kamala Harris, the vice president, because it's quite normal for a vice president to succeed a president. And she's got very high name recognition, and it would just make a lot of sense. The problem is she's not particularly exciting to people, but she could just be the consensus pick for people who don't want to see a drawn out convention battle.
She's got to be at the top of the list, right? She's the sitting vice president of the United States. How could they pass her over, right? I mean, could you imagine? We would finally have a convention worth watching if that were to happen, right? I mean, in our lifetimes, we've never seen a rock'em sock'em convention of the old days. It would be political theater off the charts if somebody other than the sitting vice president. But here's the problem. Her numbers are worse than Biden's, right? She's further underwater in terms of favorability and unfavorability than the president is. And his numbers stink. I mean, it's unbelievable.
So continuing along that train of thought, who would challenge Vice President Harris should that happen at the convention? Do you think there's somebody out there that could reasonably challenge her?
I think there would be a line. Gavin Newsom from California, Gretchen Whitmer. She might be the most interesting, attractive, pragmatic choice that the Democrats could offer up as an alternative.
And people will put their name out there just to increase the name recognition. And then remember, we would also need to choose a new vice presidential nominee as well. So there'll be people who may not think that they've got the stuff to be the presidential nominee, but they want to increase their name recognition. So I think it could be very interesting. It would be completely up to whoever got elected to be delegates in these primaries. They're the ones that are going to get lobbied. They're the ones that have the vote at the convention. And they might kind of withhold their vote in hope of getting concessions on certain issues. So they're going to play hard to get too.
which is gets us back right to the start of this. The choice of delegates is really important, always, because right, they're the ones that are formally choosing the nominee. Yet in this scenario that we've played out, which is, who knows how likely it is, but it's kind of fun to speculate. And they would be extra important just because they have no instructions to follow based on the state primary vote. And the pressure would be immense on who they should pick.
Well, I'll throw another wrinkle in there. The convention rules are voted on at the convention, so the convention can decide to change their rules at the convention.
And that brings up a good point, right? I mean, I always think I also think it's important for us to remember when we have primaries, what are we doing, right? We are, as a state, we are helping the parties with an internal party process, right? All we're doing is helping Republicans and Democrats identify candidates to run in the general election. That's a party decision. There was a bit of a dust up when Christina Caramo a couple months back said that she wanted to move away from primaries and altogether and have either caucus or convention pick all of the Republican nominees. And she caught hell for that. But I actually think that there's a case to make for that to be the process. Number one, the state wouldn't have to pay for primary elections to be conducted, right? I mean, it ain't cheap to do them. And number two, I tend to think that primaries push us toward extreme candidates in the general elections, right? If there's multiple Democrats competing, right, it's oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes whoever can out Democrat the other ones is the one who gets elected to who gets elected or gets picked in the primary. And that's how you end up with the AOCs of the world and the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world. And if party organizations would use that process to pick more electable candidates in the general election, maybe more moderate or centrist candidates, they would be seen as more electable. I think that's a case to make for doing away with primaries. But and that's where the Christina Caramo plan, I don't think would be one where they would move to pick electable candidates. I think they would make the problem worse. But anyway, there's no real governmental interest in helping parties, right? I mean, that's because that's all we're doing. I don't know. That's probably an unpopular opinion, but who cares?
So we could go into the controversy that seems to be following both of the leading candidates right now, but I guess touching on the whole primary process, this year feels really unusual. Is there historically another primary season that has felt like this, or kind of helps us to see where this might go, or is this totally unique this time around?
It is very unusual to have a rematch between the same two candidates. That has happened actually a lot of times in American history early on, but most recently, not since, I think, 1956, Adlai Stevenson and Eisenhower. I'm looking at Dave like he was alive then. So it is unusual. I think normally it would be unusual for someone who lost. We have a lot of matchups in politics between a candidate who lost and they're facing the same candidate again. And it's unusual for the outcome to be different the second time. But I think for the presidency, it is a little more difficult when you are the incumbent. You are kind of the face of whatever people think is wrong with the country, whether it's immigration or the economy or crime, or things that presidents might seemingly have little say over. So it could be a little more difficult with Biden this time because he's going to get the blame if something goes wrong with the economy. I think actually the economy has been pretty solid and people have been having negative perceptions of it despite the strength of the economy. But I think actually consumer sentiments are kind of coming around on the economy being quite good. But there's a long time between now and then, and there's a lot of Federal Reserve decisions to be made between now and then, and things that are completely out of Biden's control between now and then. So we'll see what happens with the economy, but I think that could be a big kind of wild card in terms of how well he can do as the incumbent.
I would just add one thing to that. I think the uniqueness of this cycle is that you've got an incumbent president running against his predecessor, right? That hasn't happened, I don't know, since Grover Cleveland when he, right? I mean, so it's happened, but boy, not in anybody's memory. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how this one differs from either other incumbent challenger races or rematches. But the fact that former President Trump is President Biden's chief rival, that's a dynamic that we just haven't seen, right? I mean, and I think you're seeing it because we do see some polling that shows that large percentages of Americans are maybe more fondly remembering the policies of the Trump era, especially the economic ones, at least their perception of them, right? Because I think that's a really important word that we should talk about. But yeah, I think that's the really unique piece.
So there's two ways we could go here, and I want to go to the main issues first. What do you think are the main issues for voters in Michigan as we enter primary season and then the 2024 general election as well?
I mean, I think you just went through them. Economy, immigration, maybe not so much crime here, but other parts of the country, that's a big one. I think those are the two biggies. And just yesterday, I think the state came out and is asking for volunteers for people to house refugees in their homes, right? I mean, that's a shift in our state that I'm not sure many people saw coming. That we're gonna have to go to this length, right? I mean, I think that's a big deal.
I think this election is mostly going to be about personalities and not issues, and competence and not issues. I think the issues, to the extent that people point to them, are kind of a cover for how people are actually going to base their votes on. One thing that I think might become an issue is the war in Israel, though, because I think Biden's really trying to thread a needle here and keep Jewish support without losing Arab American support. And that's going to be very difficult because the Republican Party is very united behind Israel. It could be easy for them to pick up some votes that way. And I think Biden trying to play the middle, he might end up losing the support of both.
I think that's one. I think it's really good point about personality, right? Because you can see it now, what the ads are going to be, right? It's going to be just B-roll of Biden and his stumbles, both physically and rhetorically. And it's going to be Trump and the courtroom, and he's a bad guy, and he did this and he did that, and oh my gosh, he's a criminal, and that's what it's going to be, and which is why nobody wants this rematch, right? I mean, that's what it is. So I think that's a really important thing for folks to keep in mind.
So let's talk about that rematch that majority of people don't want. Why does Trump have such a hold on the GOP, even with all these court cases looming? Why does he have such a hold on it if nobody wants to see this happen again?
Well, I think we're getting a little too Trump centric and thinking, why would people support this man? Just think, you have a person who used to be the president and they're running again for their party's nomination. It would be very hard to deny them the nomination. They have 100% name recognition. They previously won it. They have a ton of money behind them. and they scare off other I'm actually surprised that we had legitimate challengers to Donald Trump, and like a governor, two governors, three governors, forgetting about Chris Christie. I think was the governor of former governor of Arkansas, and then a North Dakotan governor, right?
Yes, for a short time.
Yeah. So we actually had some pretty legitimate challenges to a former president, which is, I think, pretty unusual. And the fact that they couldn't kind of consolidate the anti-Trump vote is no surprise. We've had elections before where people were unable to consolidate the anti-Trump vote because they didn't narrow the field soon enough. And in this case, the field got narrowed pretty fast, but then we found out that the DeSantis voters weren't actually anti-Trump voters.
Yeah.
They were just DeSantis first, Trump second voters.
You know, I guess the only thing I would say about, you know, the fact that it's a surprise, right, is that Republicans have, it appears to me, some selective memory, because yeah, he won in 16, but boy, Republicans got crushed in 18, it lost in 20, and then they underperformed in 22. And I think you can lay a lot of those defeats at the feet of the former president, right? I mean, I think sort of had a drag on Republican candidates everywhere. I mean, we'll see if it's different this time.
And then flipping over to the Democratic side with Biden, obviously the Her report came out recently. And we talked about the convention coming up and potentially Biden not being the nominee. How damaging could that report be? And could that be an impetus for change once the primary season is done? And would the party choose to kind of have him leave the nomination?
I think that the report turned out to be not as damaging as it maybe should have been, because Democrats looking at that report said, oh, that's a partisan hack. He's trying to say that our candidate is losing his memory. He's trying to undermine Biden. Don't buy into it. And Republicans obviously looked at it and said, see, he's a terrible candidate. Don't vote for him. But I think what that report revealed is that you had a Republican special prosecutor looking at the evidence and saying that he's not guilty of taking classified information, probably because he doesn't remember. It was an honest mistake and he has memory issues, and we couldn't put him on the stand to try to prosecute him because the jury's going to look at him and say, no way he did this on purpose. It's just a memory issue. So I think the report, I don't think he's said that for partisan reasons. I think he's trying to justify why he's not bringing charges on the documents. And so I think it really is kind of troubling for Democrats because it kind of revealed something that they might not have already known. And it was from kind of an unbiased source. But I don't think it's having the impact that it maybe would have if we weren't in such a partisan environment, because people are just looking at that report through their partisan lens.
I think it was devastating. Just because, and not for partisans, right, but for middle of the road voters, and maybe it was nothing new, but it just confirmed from a somewhat impartial source, what folks already suspect, right? I mean, and it just gives more evidence that, I mean, to use shorthand, Biden is old and can't remember things, right? I mean, that just feeds the narrative, just keeps feeding the narrative. And I think that is going to be talk about personalities, right? I mean, that is going to be hard to overcome.
And Biden undercut himself in defending himself from the report, where he was at the press conference. He was saying, of course, I remember my son's death. How dare you say I don't remember it? And then he could have just left and, finished the press conference. And he chose to take a question from the audience, and he mistaked the name of the prime minister of, he said he would call the prime minister of Mexico instead of Egypt. And so he just undercut his argument at his own press conference to defend himself. So I think it is troubling, but I think the average American just reads the headlines and is like, oh, Republicans, Democrats arguing about something again.
Just a quick reminder for those on Zoom and those who are here in the OC, your questions are fair game. Bring them on. We'd love to hear from you.
So I'll ask one more real quick before we jump to some audience questions. You talked about middle of the road voter. What choice do they have? And this kind of leads into a second part of the no labels, and who is no labels, and is that an option?
So no labels is a group that's been around for a couple decades actually, but have some more notoriety, some more name recognition this time around. They are planning, according to their statements prior to this year, that they would, if it looked like it was Trump and Biden after Super Tuesday, they were going to field a unity ticket made up of one Democrat, one Republican. And they have been very careful to say that they are not a party, but that they are just going to field these candidates. They came to the Detroit Economic Club a month or so ago. It was really interesting to hear them talk, two of their representatives talk about this. And, their main battle right now is getting on the ballot. And they're going to be on the ballot in, if not all 50 states, enough to be a factor. I think the biggest issue is who are they going to put on this unity ticket? One of the biggest names just said he's not running, Joe Manchin. I mean, I don't know who else would be as attractive a candidate for a centrist we'll call him, let's say third party, ticket, aside from Joe Manchin.
Well, and Joe Manchin, I mean, people who follow politics know who Joe Manchin is. He was the most famous person in the Senate for a couple of years. But the average American, Joe Manchin means nothing to them. And they at least know who Biden and Trump are. They don't know who Joe Manchin is. I don't think they want a Democrat at the top of the ticket. I think they want a Republican at the top of the ticket and a Democrat for the VP, because they said their whole point is to prevent Trump from winning.
That's interesting. So maybe they talked to Manchin and said, all right, you're on the ticket, but you got to be in the two slot, and he didn't like it.
Yeah.
That's interesting. He's coming to Detroit Monday, the day before the primary. And that was announced before he said he's not running, but that'll be an interesting speech that he gives. And
I think the person they wanted at the top of the ticket, Larry Hogan, Republican, former governor of Maryland, pretty moderate. He actually decided he's running for an open Senate seat in Maryland. So he's not going to be on the no labels label.
So Mitt Romney?
I really doubt it.
Yeah. Snoozer. Sorry, Mitt. If you're watching.
He has a very good memoir. My sister gave it 5 stars, so it's very good.
So I want to jump to a question on Zoom real quick before we jump to the audience here live. And this has to do with actually voting in the primaries. Do you see a contingent of, and I think this works both ways, but I'll read it the way this one's written, a contingent of Democratic voters voting on the Republican side of the primary to vote in a different candidate than, let's say, a Trump or a Haley?
Oh,
yes. I think that's definitely possible because the Democratic primary is unexciting. So in Michigan, all you need to do to get a Republican ballot in the primary is ask for one. And if people are going to bother to vote in this primary, I don't know why you would even bother to vote in the Democratic primary, because there's not much going on unless you want to vote uncommitted for Biden. So I think it's likely that a lot of people are going to just decide to vote in the Republican primary. And actually, a lot of people already have voted. You can get a ballot in the mail. They went out a month ago. So people have been casting their vote. I voted several weeks ago. People voted even before the Nevada primary. So you're going to have like all kinds of votes that came in a month before the election being counted. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see a lot of crossover. I don't think it's going to be a particularly interesting result, but I think it will look like a little more support for candidates other than Trump than you would have seen if people could only vote on election day.
I think where the question is going is, are partisans from one side going to meddle in the other party's primary? And with an open primary system like we have here in Michigan, that comes up every cycle, right? And I don't think I can remember maybe 2004 when McCain and Bush, or 2000 would have been 2000, where there were some maybe more Democratic crossovers than usual, but that has to be a hugely coordinated effort that I don't think that happens very much. Unless, the scenario you paint, I think, is real, where if there's no Democratic race to speak of, which there's really not, unless there is, all those Democrats can vote in the Republican primary. But I think it's going to be interesting to watch this vote for uncommitted on the Democratic side. Former Democratic State Party Chair Mark Brewer said on X, formerly Twitter, last night that he can see a scenario where in multiple congressional districts, uncommitted beats Biden. He said it's not a prediction, but an observation. And if that were to happen, that would be shocking, right? You could maybe in Dearborn Heights, right? You could see that where there's this high concentration of Arab Americans who want to send a message, as you mentioned before, about Biden's policy in the Israel-Gaza war. But even a significant number of uncommitted votes would be a real red flag for Democrats. I think that's probably the most interesting piece of this.
Yeah, I think just overall, it's going to be very low turnout. There's nothing on the ballot besides the presidential nomination. So people that have very strong opinions about something, people who want to vote uncommitted, people who want to deny Trump the vote, people who want to support Trump, they're the ones that are going to be out there voting. And also people who just love voting will vote. So anything can happen.
So real quick before we jump to the audience, because it actually played into another question online. Does that impact any down ballot races if Democratic voters are voting uncommitted?
There's nothing else on the ballot, right? It's just a presidential preference primary.
But I think if people
in most places,
if people see that there's this kind of coordinated opposition to Biden among Arab Americans and see that could be a route to achieving leverage over Democrats' policy, then I think that you could see in the August primaries some people trying to tap into that feeling. So it could have impact.
That's an interesting point. And, I think too that you mentioned it before, but let's talk about leverage, right? Yeah, they want leverage. They want the White House to change its policy. But what are the odds of that, right? I mean, pretty slim. And I also think too, a big factor is, okay, so let's say Biden changes his tune and says, we need an immediate and permanent ceasefire. It's not up to him. What, that's up to Netanyahu, right? And he can only take that so far. You mentioned it before, thread the needle. I think it is an incredibly tough needle to thread, right? Where, I can't figure out a scenario where Arab Americans come back. They say they feel, and you can't blame them, right? They feel betrayed and left behind, right? Okay, so what's it take to get them back that won't alienate a majority of the Democratic Party that likes the Biden policy, right? I think it's tough. They're in a pickle.
Great. So for the live audience, does anybody have a question for our great panel here today?
wondering, does the Kennedy name still hold any weight, or too many voters don't remember?
So the question is, does the Kennedy name still hold any weight, or do today's voters even remember that
Yeah,
much?
I think Kennedy actually might be more of a threat to Biden than the no labels, depending on, we don't know who the no labels party is going to endorse, or if they even pick someone.
Yeah.
I mean, and whoever they're picking, the name recognition is not going to be as high as Kennedy. So I think that could be trouble, not because a lot of people necessarily agree. I know he's got a very strong following among people who are anti-vaccine. But people could just use that as like a protest vote. Like, I don't feel like voting for these other two people, so I'm going to throw my vote away to Kennedy. And that could become a problem for Biden in states that have small margins.
He's getting what, 10, 11%? Here in Michigan, I think I saw in one of the most recent polls, right? That's definitely enough to sway the outcome, right? I mean, I thought the Super Bowl ad was really interesting. They totally stole it from his brother, or I'm sorry, his uncle. But and then the rest of his family got mad and he had to apologize. But I'm not buying that. I think that was coordinated and and nefarious. But anyway, I think the Kennedy name still works, right? And because it's never really left the public's, I don't know, the conversation, right? I mean, Teddy was around for a long time and was all and kept the name going, and I think this version of Kennedy also does that too.
So the question is, if Biden is not the Democratic nominee, who do you see taking his place?
We talked about this a little earlier. I think it's got to be Kamala Harris.
I think that's the most likely scenario. But I do think it's going to be kind of where a lot of people are going to come out of the woodwork. And even if they're not vying for the presidential nomination, for the vice presidential, or just getting their name out there. And remember, like, if Biden wins, we're choosing a new president in 4 years. If Biden loses, we're choosing a new president in 4 years. So they're all trying to increase their name recognition for the next election.
Or are we, right? I mean, I think that in addition to the messaging about, Biden's old and he has a bad memory and then Trump's a bad guy and he's a criminal. And I think the Republican messaging is going to go against Biden. Hey, if you vote for Biden, you're really voting for Harris because Joe's not going to make it through a full term, right? I mean, and a vote for Biden is a vote for Harris, I think, is something you'll hear a lot of this time around.
So quick question. You made me think of it. How much do candidates running in the primaries, are they playing for 4 years from now and not necessarily this year?
Well, I think that could be a reason why Nikki Haley's staying in the race so long. I mean, most people drop out when they run out of money. She seems to be not running out of money, or at least her super PACs are not running out of money. But I think that's also why she hasn't criticized Trump too hard, because I think she's really setting herself up to run again in 4 years and doesn't want to make any missteps. Not that she hasn't made any missteps, but I think she's trying to be careful to not alienate anyone. And I think that she could look like the most viable nominee in 4 years from right now. A lot of things happen in 4 years, but I think that's probably part of her goal in staying in the race so long and not going after Trump so hard.
It happens a lot, right? And I would say too that a candidate can be successful in a campaign without winning, right? They can absolutely set themselves up for a future run, whether it's for that office or for a different one. John James is a great example here in Michigan, right? He ran for Senate twice and lost, but he had he not had that experience of being on the campaign trail in a competitive race, maybe he doesn't win that congressional seat that is that stops just a couple hundred yards that way on campus here.
Right.
So I was asking because you're wondering, emphasize right, this
particular election is really boring, right? You're only voting for relatively certain outcomes and maybe a few local villages here and there. But what does the decision to move Michigan's primary up early in the calendar have an impact for years?
So the question is, try to summarize more briefly, what does Michigan moving the primary up in the calendar mean?
I think it means more influence for Michigan. There was a time between, say, 2096 and 2008, where states just kept competing for those early slots. And in 2008, Michigan was one of those, and again violated party rules that we don't need to get into that. But the earlier you go, the more influence you have as a state. And I think, for us sitting here selfishly, that's a good thing.
I think some of the early states, they aren't as influential in choosing the nominee. They're more influential in narrowing the field. And with Michigan, it's looking like it's going to be either the third or fourth state, depending on if other states change their calendar. And we could be in a position where we are almost definitive, depending on how things go. Will be the last race before Super Tuesday. And so Super Tuesday will kind of put the stamp on things in a normal year if it's not super competitive. And so Michigan could be a pretty big deal. And I went to college in Iowa. I saw all kinds of politicians come to Iowa just to get their name out there. Maybe they weren't even planning to run for president for 8-12 years, but they came all the time. And so I think we're just going to see a lot more people giving speeches in Iowa, maybe stopping by Oakland University, shaking hands with some people. And so it's going to have a more subtle effect than you might think, but it's definitely going to, and no trip to Michigan is wasted because we're a swing state for the general election too.
Okay, I want to jump to a couple of questions online from some of our out-of-town guests. This morning, Nikki Haley announced that she is not dropping out. Emphasize not. Can you speculate on her plan going forward? And I know we just talked about this a little bit.
It's odd that a candidate who is trailing terribly has to have a press conference to say, "Hey, I'm still in it." That's probably not a good sign. I think she's hanging around. Two things, right? She's setting up for 28. But I think she's also just trying to hang around, try to get a couple of delegates here and there. So if something happens with Trump, she can say, it's my nomination. You don't try to come after it.
Well, and we really haven't had a normal primary caucus yet. Iowa caucus is weird. It snowed a bunch. It had super low turnout. New Hampshire's just kind of a weird state. I don't know what to say about it. It's like a very Republican state, but also like a very kind of libertarian state, I would say. And then Nevada had a primary and a caucus on different days. Haley was on the ballot in one state. Donald Trump was on in one contest. Donald Trump was on the ballot in another. We're going to have South Carolina, which is Haley's home state. So it's not going to tell us that much information. And then we're going to have the Michigan primary, which is weird in that it's only awarding 12 delegates. So I think just objectively, it makes sense to stay in until Super Tuesday. That's the only contest that's really going to show how much strength does your candidacy have out there. But given what we know about the polling numbers, it doesn't look good for her.
Okay, so the second question, and this goes to Biden. From a sheer marketing standpoint, how does Biden's campaign reframe his own brand in the same month that he skipped the traditional pre-Super Bowl interview? A disastrous press conference, confusing Macron and deceased Mitterrand, and special counsel Hur's reporting calling Biden, quote, a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. And then the second part is, how does he reframe the narrative without mentioning Trump?
Oh, I think he should mention Trump. That's his biggest poll, is that people don't trust Trump. On the same day that the Hirsch report came out, Trump said that Russia should bomb the NATO allies. So I think that he should talk about Trump more. And I think he should make it as this is a contest between someone who's going to calmly make decisions for our country and someone who's going to fly off the handle. I think that's his best bet for winning re-election, is to demonstrate how far from the mainstream Donald Trump is.
I think people's opinions of both are baked in, right? People know what they think about Trump. They know what they think about Biden. You're not, it's too late to reframe something. It's too late to market him again, right? I mean, everybody, the other thing about it is, yeah, Biden's old, so's Trump. Now he's maybe a little more spry and hasn't had the same number of gaffes, if you will, when speaking in public, but Trump's no spring chicken. And I think too that I think it's this comparison of, so what do you want for the next 4 years, right? I mean, and what's and I think most Americans already have enough information to know where they stand.
On that, do you think there's anything that either of them could say or do that the other side's not going to jump on, but it's not going to change the opinion of those who are already going to support them?
I think if Trump gets convicted, that will shift a number of Republicans. I think there are plenty who are willing to, just like they did in 2016, hold their nose and fill in the circle next to his name. And in part, and some of it's not Biden's fault, but the economy, even though consumer sentiment is ticking up, people are still feeling it, right? We were talking beforehand about how expensive things are at the grocery store, right? My wife went the other day and she's like, man, I can't believe how expensive it is to go to the grocery store. That matters, I think, to people. And that's not going away, right? So I think, if people have these fond memories of Trump's economic policies and economic successes, that might be enough to say, you know what, maybe it'll make it better for my economic outlook. And I just got to deal with him being a jerk or unpredictable, or who knows, right? I mean, so the short answer is no.
Okay, well, we have a question here from the audience. So the question is what you think about the Republican vice presidential nominee.
Yeah, who does Trump pick?
Well, there's some logical choices, but I'm not sure how much logic is going to come into it. So I think the front runners are probably Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota. I'm not sure what she brings to the ticket, other than being much younger and female. But she seems to really love Trump, and I think Trump loves people who love Trump. So I'd put her as maybe a likely pick. Tim Scott from South Carolina, senator, was running for president and gave just a very glowing concession, endorsing Trump right before the New Hampshire primary. So it seems like he's trying to get in Trump's good graces. And then I think an interesting pick would be Elise Stefanik from the House of Representatives. Not a very conservative, but a pretty pro-MAGA member of the House. And kind of like Trump himself, I don't think Trump is like incredibly conservative, but very pro-MAGA. And I think they share a lot in common in that respect. And she might be an interesting pick, but then her not running for the House might be a problem for the Republicans trying to hang on to the House.
I think those are all at the top of my list too. And I think the one quality that Trump is looking for is loyalty, right? And in any aspect of politics, that's what he wants. So he wants somebody who's gonna stick with him, and not disagree with him, who's gonna, and I think Tim Scott is, he's kissed up quite nicely to put himself in that position. But Stefanik, I think, is maybe I don't know if she's the odds-on favorite, but she'd be tough to bet against.
Okay, so we've only got a couple minutes left before I hand it back to Dave to exit. And again, I really appreciate this opportunity. The conversation has been great. Any other final comments that either of you have about primaries and obviously the months ahead as we lead up to the 2024 election?
That's the stumper. That's the one that we don't know how to answer. I'll take us back just a bit and remind folks that it's not just the presidential. Two really hot, really going to be really expensive U.S. House races, the 7th and the 8th. The state house is separated by 2 votes. That could change hands. It's going to be a really interesting U.S. Senate general election here. No offense to Hill Harper, but Alyssa Slotkin versus Mike Rogers is going to be fascinating on so many levels. And then, I mean, obviously the presidential. I would also say too, it'll be interesting to see what the data are on early voting. Not for this presidential primary, but the early voting numbers in November, I think, are the ones to look at. They'll tell us a lot because everything I've seen tells us that early voting doesn't increase turnout that much. People that vote early were going to vote anyway. So for those who are hoping that it's going to be this big silver bullet for, oh my gosh, all these new people are going to come and vote, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think what Dave said, the interesting races are really going to be the Senate, these 2 House races, and the House and Senate. What happens there is really going to determine a lot what kind of power the president will have when they win. And right now, the U.S. House, just a few seats margin. And I don't know. Another interesting thing is, will they pass a budget this year?
Funding deadline's coming up in less than a month.
Yeah,
right?
so these are pretty important races going on in the state legislature as well, very close. So it's going to be an interesting campaign season. Even though this primary isn't that interesting, I think the August primary is going to be interesting in the general.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for being our moderator. Thank you, Nicole, for spending an hour with us in office hours. We really appreciate it. Thanks to those who came to the OC. Thanks to those who are on Zoom. Our next edition of office hours is also going to be about presidential politics, but we are going to have it in a special location. We are expanding our partnership with Macomb Community College, and we're going to do an office hours virtual session from their campus on March 12th. So keep an eye out for information on that, and we'll see you at the next office hours. Thanks again, everybody.